Okay, Dad, today is Friday, May 17th. And I thought maybe we can start this podcast by talking a little bit about China. Um, we had Putin visited China recently, and a couple weeks prior to that, Blinken went over to China and basically told China that, hey, you guys are being too productive, and this is why Russia's winning the war. This is your fault. And we said that U.S. looked like they're going to be placing economic sanctions on China, and they have. I've seen Biden has announced very high tariffs on electric vehicles, and I think some minerals. What's your take on this? What do you think
Yeah, I
about what's
think also
happening?
some, individual firms were targeted for, basically doing business with Russia too. So, yeah, they made good on their threats, and but the Chinese haven't changed their policy. They were not going to be bullied. China is not the weak partner anymore. It's not the, um, obviously. Uh, it just strikes me as very foolish. You're going to bully somebody. If you're a bully, you find the weak little kid that's 6 inches shorter than you, and whatever you kick him around. But China is equally powerful economically. Really, is more powerful than the U.S. So what do they think they're doing? Um,
Yeah, what are
yeah,
they doing?
yeah, really. Well, it's just the old habits. I think part of it is just we just couldn't get over the unipolar moment. There was a time when the whole we had is the whole world at our feet. It wasn't. I think even then we overestimated our power. Like the invasion of Iraq was disastrous. It's just not quite so easy to. Well, you can overthrow a regime, but then to build up a society or a new political system in your own image is really not possible. These are things that have to be done organically. So even then, we realized or we should have realized that there were limits to our power. But it's just, yeah, it's the intoxication of power. It's the it's hard to let go of hegemony, um, and so it's just we have this habit of browbeating. And interestingly, of course, we tried it on China. There was some. I saw a news item, a story yesterday about Niger. I think it was some may have been the foreign minister, some leading official, and in Niger's government, uh, explaining why they kicked out the Americans and brought in the Russians. And he said it was essentially, the Americans came and they delivered this ultimatum. They said you can't do business with China, and we want you to do this and that, and there'll be consequences if you don't listen to us. And later, he also he said they did it in a very condescending way too. And they said, well,
Mhm.
look, we don't have to put up with this. Maybe in the old, again, 20 years ago, they would have to put up with it. The U.S. was a hyperpower, but things have changed, especially in the last couple of years, and there are alternatives. We're going to deal with the people that treat us as equals, and don't browbeat us, don't deliver ultimatums. So bye bye, let the Russians come in because they don't do that to us.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so but it's amazing that you would think that there would be some sort of awakening or maybe some questioning of their approach. Perhaps a reevaluation, but he just doesn't seem to be there. I think again, it's hard to let go of hegemony, and it's also this ideological way of thinking. They're not really they don't think practically and realistically. They think in terms of these abstract virtues that they believe that they themselves embody, and other lesser peoples like the Chinese or the uh, the Nigerians.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, do these sanctions ever work? I mean, when's the last time we've had a successful sanctions package? I mean, if you're talking about preserving hegemony, and that's the United States doing, then I think if we just look at the history of sanctions, that's not the way to preserve hegemony. It seems to do it does exactly the opposite. it
Right.
actually begins to destroy it because people are like, well, okay, now I guess I
Yeah.
have to operate outside of your hegemony.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's very counterintuitive, in my opinion.
It's counterproductive. Yeah.
Counterproductive, yeah.
Right.
But also it's counterintuitive in my sense. It doesn't make any sense that they would want to do
Right.
place
Yeah.
these
Well. Yeah.
sanctions
No, they're
on them.
not.
It doesn't.
Right. Well, it's true. Yeah. Again, they're not being realistic. They're not being practical about it. They're not. Well, look at the Russian sanctions. They failed. And instead of saying, okay, hey, we went down the wrong road, this didn't work. In fact, we ended up shooting ourselves in the foot. It's caused more damage, to the European economy than it did to the Russian economy by far. In fact, it seems like the Russians are even somehow benefiting from it. And that a lot of
Mm,
these sanctions are in fact phony. Like it was just reading the other day about how um, India has greatly increased its imports of Russian oil and miraculously has also increased its exports of
yeah, so
oil
right.
to Europe by the same amount, right? And the
So
same thing's
yeah,
happening in Turkey or whatever. So the Europeans are still getting Russian oil, but they're just paying a markup on it. It's just so stupid. But again, they're not being practical. They're not just thinking, okay, well, let's see what's good for Europe, but it's just we must stand up to evil or something, some ridiculous notion like that. They're evaluating things in terms of this kind of very ideological and but also kind of hysterical mode.
mm.
It's just
Can you think of any time where an economic sanction
yeah.
package was
Well,
actually a good policy and we're like, man, it did what we
right.
expected it to do? And
Well, I guess the only thing I can think of is the sanctions on South Africa that were,
mm,
they over a long period of time, there were economic sanctions, but a lot of social sanctions, and you could argue that that hastened the downfall of apartheid. I think it probably did, but I think the reason it worked there was well that there was actually already, an organic process in South Africa. South Africa itself was changing, and I guess you can argue about it one way or the other, but I think inevitably that it was going to fall. That the culture was changing, um, and uh, but
mm,
you could say at least that it hastened, at the very least that it hastened the fall of apartheid, and maybe you could say that it brought it about, it changed things. That's something to I think it can be argued
yeah,
about. But yeah, other cases you just don't see it. Like Iran has been very heavily sanctioned over the course of decades, and it really, if anything, had the opposite effect. I mean, there's just one thing: is the people there aren't stupid. If they suffer economically, they know who's doing it to them. It's not their own government; it's a foreign government. And
mm,
if anything, it tends to strengthen, the nationalists within the country. These are the people who said you can't trust the Americans. Then, well, the people as a whole begin to say, yeah, you can't trust the Americans. That's what you're finding too in Russia now. I mean, that it's just the sanctions have not just backfired economically, but also politically. I mean, that actually the support for Putin and in general the skepticism or even hostility towards the West has greatly increased as a result of sanctions.
mm. So
Yeah,
can you?
they're particularly stupid. Let me just add one more thing in the case of Russia, because um, they tend to hit actually like the pro-Western segment of the population more than anybody else. The people who like to travel to Western Europe.
Mm.
Um,
Right, that
they
want to
had
buy Gucci bags, they want to go to
yeah,
McDonald's, they want, and
yeah,
that's,
yeah.
yeah.
They had their cars are being seized, and then a lot of suffering of a fair amount of abuse, and a lot of these people, some of the like Western leaning oligarchs, they had their assets seized and so on, and some of them are just going back to Russia and say forget this, and now they're
Mm,
they before they were anti-Putin, now they're pro-Putin. Yeah, it's
right.
it's it's stupid. It doesn't work.
Right. I guess one more thing to add about those sanctions is it kind of forced also investment within Russia because the Russia was cut off from the global financial system. They couldn't invest in Western Europe or the United States, so they've just started investing internally, and it's actually turned out to be a great decision and to the
Hmm.
benefit of Russia's economy. Um, with the China sanctions, can you give us some more details about what those sanctions are and what are the implications for the U.S., the world, China?
Yeah. Well, I think, okay, you mentioned the 100-year tariffs that were imposed actually on electric vehicles.
Hmm.
And this has to do with this so-called overcapacity. Okay, doesn't have anything to do with China's relationship with Russia. Um, but there are complaints that basically you're making too many cars and they're too cheap and they're probably too good also. And yeah, the Russian, or not the Russian, but the European electric vehicle manufacturers were in fear of just getting wiped out by the Chinese. Because I think the truth is that the Chinese, the models were probably better and cheaper. In the case of the U.S., one thing is like the argument that it's certainly anti-free trade. The argument that maybe you're engaged in unfair trade just doesn't hold water when you look at like the enormous subsidies that Tesla has received in this country. They're huge, right? So, what kind of argument would you have against, bringing in Chinese electric vehicles? It's just this pure protectionism. That's all it is.
Well,
Um,
won't this also just greatly increase the cost of electric vehicles in the United States and in Western
right,
Europe? I mean, I thought, we were all about going green and we wanted
right,
more
right,
solar energy and we wanted more these, electric car batteries. And who produces them? China produces them. So China stepped up and
right.
allowed Western Europe and the United States to be green, or at least pretend to be green, because we can
Yeah,
debate how green these things actually are. But the only ability of to go green is to go through China, right? I mean,
yeah.
won't this
Well,
hamper?
that seems like the best option, right? You want to go green fast. The Chinese are providing you a way, you know, a way to do it. Um, but uh, no.
So, well, will this just mean that the cost of all electric vehicles in the United States will probably go up?
Yeah, obviously, I don't know exactly. Let's see. I guess the tariffs. I know the Europeans are intending to do it, but the Americans too. I guess, right? Have also slapped on the 100% tariffs.
Yeah, I thought this
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was it was
Okay,
it was
right.
Biden that said
Yeah, it
it,
was the
right?
U.S. Right, right, right. Yeah,
Right.
and the Europeans are intending to do the same thing. But yeah, so obviously you do that, you're going to increase the cost of EVs. It's just you're creating a
Yeah, I'm just
doubling the price of a consumer, opportunity, of
right.
an option.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wonder what the thinking is from the Biden administration. Like, how are they going to spin this as a good thing? I don't see how this benefits the United States in any way. It's not.
Oh yeah,
It's
well,
strengthened
yeah,
the relationship between Russia and China. It's going to cause inflation to pick up even more here in the United States, and and just sour more and more relationships between China that produces all of our goods. So, and also, of course, expedites de-dollarization. Um, so what was the point of this? I
yeah.
don't feel
Well,
like it
right.
appeased anybody, did it? I mean, it
Well, it
just
certainly did. It certainly a piece that uh,
who?
yeah. Well, the EV manufacturers in the U.S. and the workers in the plants. I mean, that's what the appeal of protectionism is, right? And you can make an argument for that. We're just protecting our native industry, but you're obviously going to do that at the sacrifice of going green. That's it's going to you're going to slow that down. You're going to put that farther in the future, or at least you're going to make it much more expensive, for the average person. But often people don't really understand that. They see the benefits. The way they'll spin it is that yeah, the Chinese are doing something unfair. We got to protect our industry, and we can make them just as well, as long as there's a level playing field. And with this tariff, we've leveled the playing field. Let's still say something like that if they haven't said it already.
Hmm. Yeah, I wish I remember exactly what it was, but I saw something the other day where I guess it was Biden's programs for EVs, something like $3 billion, and they've only produced I think two charging stations or something like this in the whole
Uh huh.
country. It's just they're supposed to, have these fast charging infrastructure across the United
right.
States, and we've been pouring billions of dollars in it and have nothing to show for it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I know we're not at the point of corruption like Ukraine, but like how corrupt is the government, with our projects when we try to build a bridge, when we try to build these infrastructure projects.
Yeah.
Like we passed that huge infrastructure bill. That was one of Biden's sort of blockbuster bills. I forget how large it
Uh-huh.
was. Was there any real change in infrastructure? I know there's a lot of talk about bridges being racist and things like this, but what actually happened? Like, are we just kind of the most of government projects? Is it just, can we say that it's 90% corruption and just kind of overpriced, lining special interest and
Yeah, if it's, I wouldn't say corruption, though, it may say, uh, again, I
macro
think
corruption, the whole
yeah, that's
thing?
right. You could call, yeah, or institutionalized corruption. It's not corruption of the kind that you find in a lot of countries, especially third world countries. Like, you got to um, buy a house for this official, or give a large cash payment, so he looks the
Right.
other way. So you get, yes, it's undoubtedly there's some of that, but that's not really the kind of corruption that we have in this country. It's institutionalized corruption. It means that we have it's all kind of above board. It takes the form of certain kinds of regulations, but these regulations really do not serve the public interest. They serve the interests of certain companies, of commercial interests, or so. Uh, and the effects of all these various regulations is to just greatly increase the cost, and also to slow the progress of all sorts of construction projects. Things just take forever. You got to do this, and then, first there's environmental feasibility studies, and so on and so forth. And, maybe some of the stuff is necessary, but it's whatever it doesn't, it ends up taking just a terrific amount of time. So yeah, you're going to build a bridge, you're going to fix a bridge. It's just going to, you get the workers. I'm just thinking about our mutual friend Chip, that he used to work in Oak Ridge.
TVA, right?
Yeah, no, not, it wasn't TVA. It was Department of Energy, right? Or
Hmm.
maybe that's under TBA. Yeah, TVA is probably under the Department of Energy. But yeah, you just described the kind of regulations they had. That, for example, if thunder was heard anywhere, like out, on the grounds, they had to go in and they had to stay inside and wait until, an hour after, of silence, of the absence of thunder, and then they go out, and then there would be another thunderclap. No matter how distant, they go back in, and then, if they're going to climb 10 feet high, they had to have these special gear, and it was all just, it was amazing that they got anything done. That just,
Mm.
yes, again, some of these things may have been initially well intentioned or whatever, but they become excessive, and they just become huge burdens, and it just, in the end, projects just seem to go on forever at a tremendous expense. And then, of course, there's also the DEI aspect too. It's just like, oh, we can't just hire the best person. We have to make sure that we tick all the boxes, and make sure we have the proper number of minorities or women or whatever.
Mm.
And if you, and then
And
we,
one,
if we don't do it, then we become maybe subject to a lawsuit, which will, slow everything down again. Maybe, um, it goes on and
right.
on.
I mean, and when you're talking about Chip, I mean, Chip's an old man. So we're talking about this was 30 years ago or 40
Yeah,
years ago, and it's
right.
only gotten that
Yeah,
much worse. There was no
right.
DEI and this type of stuff before, so the bureaucracy's even gotten
Yeah. Well, there was
larger
some.
and
No, actually,
slower.
there was. Actually, that's been a part of things for a good 30, 40 years. It's just become worse, and, it's just intensified.
Mm.
Um,
I think I
you got to
would.
think, like, the difference is, think back in the early part of the 20th century, um, like when the skyscrapers were going up in New York. They went up fast, like the Empire State Building. I can't remember how long, but it didn't take very long. And now you
Right.
see that in China, but you don't see
Yeah.
it here. I
No.
think everything's just slow, because again, there's just this, we can't work these people more than, we can only have so many shifts or whatever, and then it's just unions are a part of it, and
Right.
It,
No, yeah, it's incredible watching the construction in China. I was there for 10 years and just saw so much building. The second tallest building in the world is the Shanghai Tower. I watched it go up, right from my balcony. It seemed like every day I'd wake up, another floor was added at least. And, in
yeah,
6 months to a year, a 150-story building. And I was just thinking this would take, first of all, the U.S. would never even be able to do this, build something this big I think at this point in time, or it would cost an absurd amount of money and take them 40 years or something to build it.
yeah,
I feel like I almost would prefer the old school corruption where you have to bribe the policemen and the guards rather than the macro one, because at least the corruption's apparent. But here the problem is, like you said, it's institutionalized corruption. It kind of just hides behind the scenes, and we talk about it, and it's everywhere, pervasive. We talk about it in the military-industrial complex. You want to build anything, it's always cost plus because the buyer is the government, and so they have an infinite printing press. So nobody feels that bad if you overcharge them a little bit, and we can throw in some other team that's supposed to do some other regulatory work or whatever, bring them in, line their pockets. It's okay. Uncle Sam's got a big deep pockets. It's got infinite well of money. And so that I think anything that the U.S. does ends up costing a lot and very little gets done. And it's so apparent here. I see these bills get passed, like, well, we had the Inflation Reduction Act, which did nothing to reduce inflation. We have the infrastructure bill. We see all the money going to the military-industrial complex. We don't see any real changes, increase in productivity. And then you sort of juxtapose that against countries like China or Russia, and you just see like there's no way. The corruption is too institutionalized that we can't. Too many people are lining their pockets. I don't think we can get rid of this problem anymore. Do you agree, or?
yeah. It's gonna take kind of pretty much a revolution. It's not incremental reforms. It's just something. It's kind of like barnacles that have been encrusting a whale or something over the course of years, and now it's 2 feet deep. It's not. You can chip off a few barnacles, and it doesn't change the situation at all. They're just going to have to rip it all off somehow and start all over again.
Yeah, that's why I was so excited about Vivek when he was running in the beginning, just because he was talking about doing some mass layoffs and overhaul and just get rid of all these departments. But I just don't believe it's going to happen,
Right.
First of all, I mean, Vivek, we don't even know if he's going to end up being in politics. He seems to be trying to potential candidate for vice presidential candidate for Trump, but who knows? And with Trump in power, we just, like we said, we just don't know. It's just chaos. We don't know if anything's going to get done.
I mean, the current rumors is that he's going for some kind of empty suit.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for a rhino, for an establishment Republican. It may be that those rumors are wrong, but that's what we're hearing.
Is there any idea on when he'll choose his VP candidate?
Well, I guess
is there a deadline?
Well, essentially, you have to do it before the Republican convention. That's or at least before. Yeah, pretty much.
When's the Republican convention?
It's I think last time I said late June, but it turns out it's like I think the middle of July sometime.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that'll be interesting to see. Did you see that Biden has agreed to debate Trump? Couple of debates. You gonna watch those?
I don't know. I might. I don't know.
I think it'll
Maybe
be hilarious.
I should. Yeah, it probably will be.
And you had two 80-year-old men pooping in their diapers on stage. Doesn't get a lot better than that.
Yeah.
So anyways, but just to wrap up the economic sort of warfare that's starting to heat up between China and the U.S., do you think that China is going to start to respond, do a kind of a tit for tat type of economic sanction package, and we can start to see a slow escalation? And where do you see this going?
Well, they might. They certainly have done that in the past. They've and I think they threatened to do it this time. I don't know if they've taken any steps so far. Though, I heard recently that they dumped a lot of U.S. debt. And maybe that was in response to it. Maybe that was kind of a warning shot. But who knows? Maybe they were going to do that anyway.
If China drops all of the U.S. debt, they had something like $1 trillion. I don't know where it's at now. They've been slowly getting rid of it, dumping it. But what would that mean for the U.S.? Could that cause like a real shock and collapse in the dollar? If all of a
Yeah,
sudden they're like,
yeah. Who knows where the collapse will occur? That's really hard to predict. But of course, it would cause harm. It's going to increase, the interest rates here. It's going to accelerate, the growth of the debt in this country. It's going to increase the cost of the debt. That's what's going to happen. That's been the big change. For a long time, interest rates were very close to zero, and under those conditions, basically money is free, and so that we during that time we just stopped thinking about debt, and you had people like Paul Krugman saying that debt doesn't matter or whatever. We got these low interest rates. That's fine until the interest rates go up. Now they're going up, and see these bonds mature, and they have to be
rolled over.
rolled over, but at a higher interest rate, and so
Right.
now we're paying for it. That's going to, if China continues to dump U.S. debt, that'll just accelerate.
Right. And also just with these sanctions, or these tariffs, it just means that we're going to have more inflation here, which also will put pressure to raise interest rates to kind of to slow down inflation. So,
Right.
has there ever been a country that's been in a similar position with us where we have a huge amount of debt and high and rising interest rates and interest rates at the level they are? I mean, obviously,
Well,
nothing to the total
yeah,
number we have, but GDP per
right.
capita, I know Japan had 200% debt to GDP. Countries like Italy had
Yeah,
very high, but of course, they're operating with smaller numbers. Here, we're talking about $35 trillion
yeah,
of debt at a 5-6%
right.
interest
Yeah,
rate.
yeah,
It's
never on the scale. It's never on the scale. And yeah, I don't think there's really. Actually, the interest rates are still pretty low. They could go a lot higher. That's the thing. That's the risk. And it just now that there are inflationary pressures, it's harder to drop interest rates like we were able to do earlier. I mean, those days are over. So it seems like we're kind of headed into a entered this vicious cycle that's going to be very hard to get out of.
Do you think that it'll just be like one day we wake up and it's like, uh-oh, we're in trouble and it's taken off. You know what I mean? All of a sudden inflation's out of
Yeah,
control. All of a sudden we're jacking up interest rates to 20-30%. The amount of the payments on our debt are now reaching $10 trillion a year. Like, will it all
yeah.
of a sudden just take off? Is that how it typically works? Or is it
Well, again,
slowly,
I don't know
slowly?
if there's anything typical for us. I think this is a unique case. I mean, you can
But
look at previous,
it's
right? Yeah, but it could just take off. I think that's because part of it is it's a certain kind of trust that the dollar system is based on, right? Which we've talked
mm,
about before, and trust is something. As long as it's there, it holds you up. But it can vanish overnight, right? And when it vanishes overnight, then yeah, all these things can just we really can't have a collapse, a very very rapid collapse.
yeah, trust is eroding, I see.
Right, it's eroding, and then at some point it could vanish, and when it vanishes, it's just like Wile E. Coyote
Right. And
realizes that
there's
there's nothing beneath his feet.
yeah, I try to think about it all the time, but I think it's not a good idea to try to predict what will be that catalyst that
Right.
starts it. Like
Well,
it
you never
could
know.
be
Yeah, nobody.
right.
It
There's an
isn't right.
infinite number of
Right. Right.
possibilities. So,
Right.
I mean, I was thinking like, okay, maybe China dumping U.S. treasuries could start to trigger,
Right.
which it could. But there's so many things happening: the war in Ukraine, things with Gaza, protests, etc. Let me switch over to something else that I haven't been paying very close attention to, but I've just been turning on the news every now and then, catching snippets.
Uh-huh.
And it's about the Trump case. Have you been following this at all? The whole
I haven't been following it closely. I think I may not know much more than you do. From what I
okay, well,
understand, is that it's a rather, eh, um, even people that hate Trump kind of admit that it's kind of a nothing burger, as they say, right? It's just there's really not much to this case.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, it's always hard even just to kind of ask people like, so what is the crime? What is he being charged with exactly?
Right.
What is, and then you always get some kind of convoluted response, and you're like, well, if you can't really even articulate what the
Right.
crime is or the charges, like,
Right.
what's the case? From my understanding, it's because he used like personal funds to pay off for hush money for Stormy Daniels, and they're saying that that should be that because of the he's a public figure running for office, he should have used campaign funds. But people are saying if he
Yeah.
used campaign funds, it would have been they would have
Yeah.
a much stronger case. So
Right.
the whole
Right.
thing, at least that's my
Yeah. No.
understanding.
It just.
So
Yeah. Yeah. It's not clear what law he broke. That's the thing. I remember even when it was the charges were first brought. I think it was even the New York Times, which is is about as anti-Trump as you can get. They were excited about it because any case against Trump is something that brings joy to their hearts. But they admitted that this was example of rather inventive prosecution. I mean, there was the rather let's say groundbreaking interpretations of the law. In other words, it's not firmly based on known law. They're just sort of trying to invent a law and a crime going along with it. Um, and clearly, I think there's that's never right. In fact, if the law should be clear and understood by everybody ahead of time. You don't just sort of like reinterpret the law to get somebody. But it's especially egregious, when you're going after a political figure. It just makes it clear that what you're doing is just
politically motivated.
yeah, right,
Right.
yeah,
So I mean, it's interesting to look at because this is this lawfare is actually going to have will have serious implications in the future of the United States. Let's say the country pulls together, survives, and we figure out to be friends with most other nations and start dealing with our debt problem. But we've
uh-huh.
opened up a can of worms with this lawfare, right? With this, with
Yeah,
going prosecuting,
yeah. No, it's
political
very
opponents.
right.
So is in that sense, are you saying is there any way of salvation back from this? Like after this happens, that we've gone through this, we've gone this far, and let's say Trump wins, he's going to turn around and start prosecuting everybody that was trying to prosecute him. Go
Well,
after
that's
him.
obviously the danger. That's the problem. It's like once, um, and that's something that the enemies of Trump, clearly are not really thinking about. They're just so eager to get him that they don't stop to think that they're actually, putting themselves at risk. They
Yeah,
right. Again,
it's
they're making use of this weapon. Once they establish that you can use law as a weapon to attack your opponents, what prevents your opponents from using the same weapon against you? And just you begin to tear apart the whole system of law.
Hmm. Yeah, it's surprising that the Democrats are wanting to do this so badly because it's so obviously backfiring. Every type of lawfare case they brought against Trump has backfired. I mean with that Fannie Willis thing, the mugshot of Trump. I think Trump's polling at like 30% amongst black voters now, which is absurd, insane.
Yeah,
So it's like you think that they would have some common sense and like, if we have such a weak case that it's just going to backfire. But
right,
I think the problem is that people live in their bubbles too
right,
much that they just
right.
don't understand what a lot of people are seeing and knowing. And I need to realize that too. And sometimes I wonder,
Yeah,
I think we're not in a bubble because I do look at the mainstream media but I can just see through it so clearly now. But I
yeah,
realize so many people don't. They that still do,
right,
and it surprised me. I had some
right.
uncomfortable conversations with my father-in-law just because, I was just kind of hearing some things. I'm like, whoa, like, okay, we clearly don't. We
Uh,
clearly have different narratives that we've been
yeah,
following, but just
right.
these ideas that I'm just like, really,
Yeah,
you think that, like thinking that like it's you're not allowed to say slavery is bad in the South. Weird things, like that I think kind
uh-huh.
of get pushed through MSNBC mainstream media that try
Yeah,
to
no,
appeal to their
that's
base, but it's
right.
so over the top, But basically, it's like, oh, you're
Yeah,
talking about getting rid of critical race theory. That's not saying you could still say slavery, or like that's not mean that everybody in the South loves slavery. Like
yeah,
and
yeah,
and
right.
that you can't say slavery is bad, or
Yeah,
the don't say gay bill in Florida. they just warp these things so
Right.
much to fit whatever narrative they have, and you
Yeah.
just fed it constantly that like
So yeah,
you
if
live in
you're
a different
within,
bubble.
right. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's very true. So I think that's what you're completely right about that. It's just that's what's often behind a lot of short-sighted, um, you know, measures that the establishment takes. You know, against Trump, for example, this lawfare. It's because, yeah, among everybody they know agree that this is a great thing to do. It's very popular, you know, among everybody. Just like they're just going to get a high fives. You know, if you're the judge, you're the prosecutor, whatever that's taking it to Trump, you know, well, you know, maybe some of these people don't even care what the larger consequences are. But by, you know, moving forward with these lawsuits or whatever, they know that they have established themselves as heroes within their community. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they've greatly increased their own personal, you know, prestige. Um, and then, but you would think at least at some level, like you know, the people that the advisors to Biden that want to get him reelected, that they would be able to see beyond that, and maybe some of them do. So maybe there is some debate about the advisability of going ahead with these cases, but you suspect even among those people, you know, they're just so. Um, Again, it seems like so much of politics is just hysterical now, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just you know just whatever it is. This is the literal incarnation of Hitler. Of course, we got to do this.
Right. No, man, the Trump really broke the minds of, I would
Yeah,
say, the majority of America. I mean, it broke a lot of the people on the left that just have realized, think that he is Hitler and he's destroyed the world and we got to do anything we can to stop him. But he's also broke the mind of a lot of people on the right that are just diehard MAGA and can't see anything
yeah,
beyond like,
right,
oh, Trump is just the man. And it's so strange that I feel like 70% of the population of America are kind of in one of these two camps,
right,
that are just like, the he's the antichrist and he's going to destroy this country, or he's the second coming and he's the
right.
savior, he's going to save the country. Instead of just kind of having a bit more nuance and just like, hey, he's not a great politician and look at his track record. He's not the man, not the savior, but neither is Biden. It's like I
Yeah,
don't.
right.
Yeah, yeah, true. Well, we'll see because it looks like we're gonna get Trump. I think for sure. I don't see how he can lose.
Seems likely. Yeah.
So, do you think that this lawfare situation, like, is the country doomed just because of these cases? That like that the legal system is now broken. This is a whole nother
Yeah.
front. Like
Right.
we're always focusing on things that are kind of crumbling in this
Yeah.
country, and
Well,
like this is a
yeah, you
big
know,
one, right?
I didn't know. I think it's very serious. You're right. I mean, this is not, because, you know, part of what's made the country great is this system of laws that we have. And I remember like when I first went to Taiwan, whatever, you could see that that was something that hadn't really been established in Taiwan at that time. I think maybe, you know, over the course of time, it is being built up. Well, that's actually a very complicated topic. Let's not get into that. But
Mm-hmm.
I just struck by um, the difference. When I first went there, which was like 30 years ago, America was a country of laws, and you can find exceptions, but there were exceptions to a rule, and the rule was well established. And then in place in Taiwan, this is one very small example, but I think it speaks volumes. I remember occasionally we go, um, your mother and I would visit certain places on the coast, and we take a bus that would go, along the seaside there. And we would always pass this manufacturing plant of some kind, and it was just pumping. It was clearly just like uh, pumping poisons into the sea. It was just this yellow, soupy stuff, and this huge stain would spread out
Oh,
from it. It just
gross.
looked awful. It just
Yeah.
really uh, horrible. And, I asked people. I remember asking, why is that? How can why don't they have laws against that? And he said, oh, that they'll never shut that down. That one belongs to the KMT. That was the ruling party right there.
Oh.
And that's just the way things work. And everybody understood that that's the way things work. Now, it was also true, like there were all kinds of traffic rules, and nobody paid attention to them. It was just utter chaos on the roads. And then just walking down the sidewalk, it said the sidewalk was never level. It was like it was at different elevations depending on which store you were walking in front of, and there were rules on how these were supposed to. But people ignored it. We want to have the sidewalk this way here, so you just pay off the local cop, and it's done according to your way. And it's just there was kind of an upside to that. It was just like it was really easy to start a business, and so because
Mhm.
rules were generally ignored, that you didn't have this. Here, you live in such fear of breaking one regulation or another that a lot of people are just afraid to start a business. But you
Mm,
just know that you just give a gift to the local policeman or whatever, or the inspector when he comes by, and everything's cool, and you can conduct your business out of your living room or wherever you want to. I mean,
right.
that's kind of there was upside, but it also made for a lot of chaos, and it made it also, yeah, it was clear too that people were victimized, for just running afoul of the authorities. They didn't. Really wasn't a law that they could have a legal authority that they could appeal to, because it didn't really exist. I mean, on paper it exists, but it didn't exist in reality. And so, uh, you know, uh, there's probably more. There are a lot of positive things you could say about Taiwan back then, and in a lot of countries it takes a much darker form, that chaos. Um, but it seems like, yeah, that was the thing that really that I remember a lot of people looked up to America for. They were really struck by the fact that we actually had laws, and and powerful people could be convicted for breaking the laws, and the ordinary person could always make it bring his case to court and have his day in court. Um, that's something that made us special. It's not that it's all gone, but actually these cases are just set very bad precedents because they clearly are a use of that legal system for purely
Yeah.
political ends to punish certain individuals, and that is not what our system's supposed to be.
Right. I think it's a lot scarier than people realize, because a lot of people don't understand the gravity of what's happening. But this is kind of like the first step to a real Orwellian future, or one of the first steps. It makes me think of, like, the old Soviet Union, where if you're an enemy of the state, they can bring up any charges against you, trumped up charges. And I feel like this is the first kind of stage of that. We maybe don't realize, like, oh, it's not a big deal. They're just going after Trump. But this is basically what they're saying, is that basically they can make your life hell, go after anybody through the legal system just based on your political beliefs. And we're seeing it being chipped away at a little bit. Like, I don't know if you saw the news about that they were monitoring, bank transactions with, like, internal notes that were like MAGA, or had anything to related to do this. They're surveilling these people. So it all of a sudden says, like, if you are a big MAGA supporter or an influential
Uh,
person, that you're probably on some type of list and you're being watched, and they're going to try to go after you because you are an enemy of the current establishment, the current state, and so, and we've seen some of this. Some people that were actually that were part of the J6 thing, for example, that are being going to go to prison and jail. And it's just a scary thing. And then I'm just thinking, like, after this, there's going to be so much anger and resentment from people that were persecuted, and they're going to most likely be in power. And then we're going to see the same thing again, going around the other side. It's just going to, I'm afraid it's just going to start to spinball out. And all of a
yeah,
sudden, everybody starts becoming enemies of the state, and everybody starts to have to worry about what they're saying, and censoring themselves, and everybody's potentially broke the law, or doesn't really matter, because what we're seeing is that
right.
we can make up some charges, and we can make your life hell, and we can just put you in prison or jail, without a proper due process. Yeah, it's scary. Do you think that devolve into chaos in the next couple of years, that we will be able to restore the rule of law, or that it's just that now
Yeah,
that this erosion has
right.
started, that there's no real turning back?
Yeah, I guess I share your pessimistic view. I mean, I think it's like this the rule of law was something, a real achievement of Western civilization, and something that was built up over the course of centuries, many generations. Um, and it's just not something that can be reestablished overnight. I mean, see, like the natural state of affairs is chaotic, and it's powerful people, simply um, jockeying for power, and using whatever means are available to them. Um, so yeah, unfortunately, I don't see that civilization's on the upswing. Not in the Western world anyway. It seems like the sun is setting on us. It's um, I don't have much hope. Not certainly not in the short run or the medium run. Maybe when things get real bad, there'll have to be just I don't some somewhere somehow, there's going to people are going to just have to start all over again. But it's going to be a long journey back to sanity and to a sound system.
Mm. Do you think we could just be completely wrong about everything, and the U.S. is just going to be fine? Like, I'm just so sure that it's that
Yeah.
we're end of
Well,
empire. But could be wrong? I mean, or
yeah.
it's always
Yeah. I mean,
possible.
it's always possible. It just seems that especially over the last several years, and in particular the last couple of years, the trends seem to be accelerating. It's just um, that the pessimistic predictions seem to be the more accurate one. It's just that things actually, if you take the pessimistic view of things, it just seems that you're proved right much more often than not. That just seems to be the trend that is what we're experiencing now. I don't think it's just an unnecessarily pessimistic take on things. It's just reality.
Do you think most Americans, share our views?
Uh,
With
well, I wouldn't say share our views, because most people are just are not very well informed at all, and don't really even follow politics very closely. They just they hear about things indirectly, and they tend to get the news pushed to them through Facebook or whatever, and that's a kind of um, a sure formula for ignorance, or a lack of real understanding. Um, but when you're talking about, but it's clear that that the nation as a whole, has become much more pessimistic. That when people are asked, do you think the country's moving in the right direction? It seems with every passing year, there are more and more people who answer no, it's moving in the wrong direction. And
mm,
then skepticism of major institutions has been steadily increasing. So you have like the number of people that trust the mainstream media has declined considerably. If we say it's particularly on the conservative side of the spectrum, but I imagine I think we're discussing recently that that's going to start happening on the leftist side, at least to some extent, because of Gaza. Um, So yeah, there's just a growing mood of skepticism, a loss of trust in major institutions, in governing institutions, and a growing pessimism. And so, in that sense, we're not really we have a lot of company. Just but I think
mm,
most people couldn't really tell you exactly what the problem is, and they don't have the facts, or they don't have there's just a gnawing sense that things aren't right,
right.
and that these institutions that they used to be able to trust, they just can't trust them anymore, and maybe they can't really explain why they can't trust them, but they just don't trust them anymore.
Well, I also find it difficult to articulate it. That that things are bad. I'm like the end of Empire vibes are strong, and then if I'm supposed to give somebody kind of a recap on it, I kind of just freeze and go all over the place. I'm like, Gaza, inflation, lawfare, and I don't know what to say. So,
Uh-huh.
could you maybe do like, if you had to give an elevator pitch, you're in the elevator, you got 30 seconds. People are like, hey, how's America doing? You think the empire's going to collapse? Are you able to give a 30-second, 1 minute kind of summary? See if you can, of the of sort of the underlying major problems with the U.S. Almost like bullet pointed, if possible.
Yeah.
That I know that's
Okay.
tough.
Well, yeah. Um, well, yeah, it would be hard to say. Well, let's say on the international front, America is becoming increasingly isolated. I think that's clear. First, like with the recent Gaza votes, we're on the Security Council, we're the only country. In the General Assembly, we're just one of nine, and five of the countries are little tiny islands owned by us. Um, yeah, we're becoming isolated. Now we claim to have represented, like the international community vis-a-vis Russia, but in fact we find we're becoming more isolated on that. That the rest of the world isn't going along with our sanctions. They don't support us on Russia. Um, but then, yeah, back home, well, we have just a debt that's going completely out of control. It's just, and it's mind blowing how huge it is, and it's not getting any signs that it's going to get better, but it's actually, the problem is accelerating. An additional $1 trillion every 100 days. It's just so much that you don't even, not even able to grasp it. This is clearly unsustainable. And then we have a political system that has just become increasingly polarized and just stupid. Look at our two candidates. If you want to see what bad shape we are, just look at them. One of them is clearly senile, and the other one is just a buffoon. And it's a talk show host, or maybe not exactly a beauty pageant host, and this is what we have. What more do I need to say?
Yeah. Okay. Good. I think that's a great place to end it. That's a good recap. Um, okay. All right. Good stuff. All right. Thanks a lot, Dad.
Okay.